Well, I mean, it could be, said Louisa, sounding like a little Miss Know-it-all. Me and my grandparents watched a movie once on a Saturday evening, and even the slightest oddities and details were important hints needed to solving the murder in the end. I guess only time will show if that applies to our case as well, I considered. Kai, do you still have the list of our suspects? Sure, he said. I even have a pen. Okay, note down our most recent observations. Oh, and try to describe what the shoe prints we found yesterday looked like. We didn't make a drawing, and by now they're completely covered in snow. Kai skillfully recreated the shoe profile we'd seen the day before and put down our observations regarding the missing booklet in clumsy letters. I just hoped that we would be able to decipher any of it later on. Soon we caught up on my dad and walked closer to the parsonage. Chapter 13, in which my dad keeps forcing us to do work for him. A figure on the other side of the Mitchell leaned out of a window and tried to use the handle of a broom to break off the meter-long icicles hanging from the roof. "Good morning, Mr. Zweifel," my dad called, always trying to be friendly to almost everyone he came across. "I wish you and your wife a Merry Christmas." "I am wishing you a Merry Christmas as well," smiled Mr. Zweifel and gave us a friendly wave with his broom. Then he pointed the broom handle in our direction. "The usual lots of kids visiting?" I knew exactly what Mr. Zweifel was playing at. I think I actually mentioned it before, but my dad still had connections in one of his old parishes from long before the divorce from my mom, especially to a group of former confirmants. They often visited him during the holidays, and I also knew why the man had brought it up. My dad had told me that Mr. Zweifel had a brother who ran a small bakery in a neighbor village as well as owned a mobile bakery, and sometimes that brother had a lot of leftover pastries, and since he obviously couldn't eat them all, he often passed some of the leftovers to other people, for example, Mr. Zweifel. And Mr. Zweifel had a habit of giving some of it to my dad to share with his teenage guests. Oh no, I already had a premonition for what was going to happen next, though maybe we could use the situation to our advantage. "No, Mr. Zweifel, it's not that. My daughter just brought 2 friends from school. That's why there's a few more children than usual." "Would they still like to have a couple rolls and pastries?" "Did your brother bring another batch of leftovers?" "He did," called Mr. Zweifel. "Feel free to send the 3 children over to pick them up." "Sure. Have a nice day," said my dad, and I angrily picked at his sleeve. Mr. Zweifel continued hitting at icicles with his broom, so he had no chance of hearing what I said next. "But, Dad, we've been running errands for you all day long. We want some time to play for ourselves as well." Now it was Kai who kicked my shin with enough force for the pain to linger for a good while after. "I'm sure we'll survive going on one more." It took me 2 seconds to get over the initial shock of being brutally kicked in the leg and understand Kai's reasoning behind it. We'd just been granted the opportunity to keep eliminating further suspects from our list. "If you think so," I gave in, probably once again quickly enough for my dad to wonder what had happened to his daughter. "Well, it's probably best if you go right away," he said, and pointed to a bridge leading over the small brook that was the Mitchell, the brook that the village itself had been named after. "That's the quickest way towards the house. It's the number 8, and you'll have to press the upper doorbell, otherwise he won't hear you." We set off. Once we'd crossed the bridge, we had to stomp through almost knee-deep snow because some idiot had forgotten to clean the way. The second we get home, I'll spend an hour sitting on the heater, said Louise, looking already a bit like an icicle herself. You'll consider yourself very unlucky then, I said dryly. My dad is not much of a heating kind of guy. He says overheating is equally bad for the environment, your health, and your bank account. Sometimes I feel like he was born into the wrong body and should have been a polar bear in the Arctic or a yeti in the Himalayas. Kai and Louise laughed a little, only the tiniest bit though, because they were very much freezing at this point. Lucky for us, it wasn't very far until we reached the Ziegler's house. We rang the upper bell, thankful for the hint my dad had given us. None of the bells were labeled, so we would have had to decide between a bell that didn't have a name at all, one that had something completely intelligible written next to it, and a third that was just a bell button. A friendly-looking elderly man opened the door. One of the first things I noticed was his strong limp. He seemed to need a walking stick to get around the house. I glanced towards Kai and Louise, and we all had the same thought. Given that Mr. Zweifel could barely walk, just like his wife, who stood at the top of the stairs with a walking stick of her own, they really didn't look like prime suspects in our investigations for the burglar at the parsonage. Quite the opposite. We could probably cross both of them off the list, which we would do as soon as we got back to the parsonage. Now all the man had to do was give us our promised bag full of pastries and send us on our way as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, adults, even really old and friendly-looking ones, had little appreciation for such simple and straightforward thought processes. Oh, there, you three look like you're freezing. Come on in and warm up. My wife's gonna make each of you a mug of hot chocolate. I looked at my two friends for supportive ideas how to get away from here, but both of them just nodded happily. Kai had only heard hot chocolate and wanted to stay, and Louise had only heard warm up and wanted to stay as well, giving me little other choice but to slip into the house as well. We had to walk up the old and well-worn little staircase and reach the kitchen after passing through a multitude of little rooms. It wasn't very large and had a sloping ceiling. It held a little skylight that had to be the window the man had looked out from earlier. There was even a little snow on the floor beneath the window. On the side of the kitchen there was a small, slightly elongated table that contained different variations of tasty-looking rolls and a wide array of pastries. It really felt like we had just walked into a bakery. You can pick out whatever you want, the man said with a smile. And if you want, you can already eat something while drinking your hot chocolate.